With how fast technology have been developing for the last 30 years, every decade there are one or two companies that are able to dominate their field completely and earn 80% of the revenue there is in the market. For example, during the mainframe computer era, it was IBM and Oracle that dominated the market. When we evolved into PC, it was Microsoft and Intel that became the number one players. But once mobile device became the main focus in early 2000, it was Apple with its innovative iPod and iPhone series that have revolutionized the industry, dominated the market, and became one of the most valuable company in the world. Now, when 2020 came and as we head into a new decade, I believe that Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, short for TSMC, will be one of those companies where later on we look back and realize how hard it has dominated its own industry for the next decade or more. So as you recall, last year I've made a video talking about the 5 companies I have in my long hold stock portfolio, which makes up to be 10 to 15% of my overall portfolio. And TSMC is going to be my 6th company that I add into this portfolio. So in this video, I'll be talking about the history, the strengths on why it will dominate, and also potential weakness I see with this company. Now before we start, a quick thank you to our first ever sponsor, Reliant, who have developed a fun modern day Monopoly mobile game called Landlord Go that I'll be talking more later in the video. Alright, without further ado, let's jump into today's video. Now, as a disclaimer, I'm not telling you to buy this company in your stock portfolio. I'm just telling you my thought process and my perspective. You have to do your own research, talk to your own professionals to figure out if this is something right for you. So first of all, let's talk about how I evaluate a company. Now, usually I do take a look at the financial statement just so I can understand the growth over the years, but I don't look at things like price versus earning ratio and all that numbers too much because most of the companies I hold, I intend to hold them for at least 5 to 10 years in the long run. So what I care most about is the scope of the company. For example, things like how are the infrastructures, how diversified are their businesses, what kind of grip do they have on the market, and how likely is it for someone to come in and compete with them. For example, one of the company I listed in the last video was Tesla. Now, why I put Tesla in there was even though there were competitors coming up, for example, NIO, which has been hotly talked about, and they have very interesting ideas like instead of charging your battery, they will set up stations all over the country and completely replace your battery so you don't have to wait and you can just drive your car and go. It doesn't have a sister company like Tesla does with SpaceX, where they're building rockets and really advanced technology and resources that can share with each other. And this is why even though in the EV space there's a lot of competition, I still place Tesla as one of my 5 long hold companies. And in the video I've said out of all 5, this one is the dark horse that has the most growth potential. Alright, so now I've explained what I look at when I evaluate a company. Let's move on and look at TSMC. So in case you're not familiar with this company, here is a very brief explanation of what they do. So do you have a smartphone, a laptop, a computer, or other device that you use? Pretty much every device you use nowadays will have a microchip inside to power the device and does what it does. Now, many companies out there will just design the product and then buy the chip directly from someone else, while some companies like Apple and AMD will actually go and design their own very chip. But no matter which kind of company they are, at the end of the day, someone still have to build the inside of the chip. And that's basically what TSMC does. They just focus on building the actual chip itself for other big company clients. Which brings me to the first strength this company has, and it's extreme niche. Now, by being a pure play foundry, which means they just focus on one thing, they're able to streamline and focus all their production and R&D effort into one specific area. This significantly able to boost the efficiency when it comes to production, and this is why even AMD, who designs and produce their own chips, have begun farming out their chip production to TSMC because it's just so much more cost efficient if you push the production to someone who just focus being number one in what they do. Now, usually when you hear a business only have one channel of revenue, that's usually very risky. And in the previous video, the 5 companies I listed span their business across multiple fields and have different stream of revenues. But for TSMC, this works very well because of their second strength, and that is no-name strategy. So for TSMC, even though it produces a majority number of chips in the world, it does not try to push its brand onto the product. They simply just manufacture. And this is a great positioning and why giant companies like AMD and Apple love working with this company and able to farm its production out to them, because they provide no threats or competition when it comes to branding. And this is how TSMC can have over 400 clients in the world, all using its technology and production. Now moving on, the third strength TSMC has is its technological advantage. So inside the microchip, there are basically transistors, and electricity run through them to power the chip and does the computation that we want it to do. So the general rule of thumb is that the smaller these transistors are, the more efficient and powerful your chip can be, because number one, you can pack more of these transistors in the same tight space, and number two, because they're smaller, it's also less distance to cover. Now obviously the smaller a transistor is, the more technological challenge someone will face when building them. Nowadays, transistors are so small that we're using nanometers to describe their sizes. Now TSMC produces anything from 90 nanometers, which is used in older 2003 and 2004 computer models, all the way to the very small 5 nanometers, which is in the latest iPhone 12 A14 chips. And this is where TSMC has a massive advantage over everyone else in the same market. As of 2020, only 2 companies in the world have the technology to commercialize and build a 5 nanometer chip. One is TSMC, the other is Samsung. Now, even though they're both 5 nanometer chips, a quick comparison of the two products shows that TSMC's chips are more dense while having a low wafer cost. So in conclusion, even though they're both producing a 5 nanometer chip, TSMC has a clear technological advantage over Samsung. And this is actually very important in building an advantage for TSMC, because it just sounds like they have a slight advantage over others by producing a much smaller chips. It's actually leaps and bounds ahead of everyone else. Most people are actually still producing at the 28 nanometer version, when TSMC is already producing efficiently at the 5 nanometer. So for most people, we probably can't visualize or imagine why is it significant that to go from 28 nanometer to 7 nanometer and then 5 nanometer, so on and so forth. A better way to think about this is more like a different iterations of the same type of chips, with each iteration significantly more difficult to produce, but also a lot more powerful than the last one. And because TSMC is so much ahead versus everyone else, it brings me to the last and the most important point of their strength. Now, before we move on, let's take a very quick ad break and hear from our sponsor. Reality Games' Landlord Go is basically a modern day monopoly. They have creatively mapped out every single real estate building, no matter where you are. And you can purchase shares of them to build up your real estate tycoon portfolio. Once you bought the building, it will automatically accumulate revenue for you. Like Monopoly, if you share the same type, for example, here I have 3 orange that are restaurants, you can get a bonus on your buildings. But what makes this a modern day monopoly is its unique features. First, you can play this in real life through AR mode. So as you walk around the street, you can see all the buildings that are available for you to buy. Second, due to COVID-19, the game actually allows you to use agent to travel to anywhere to buy properties. This is really cool and allowed me to visit places we originally planned to go. For example, as you see, I'm in Paris here buying buildings. Lastly, the real estate that you bought can be upgraded and resold in marketplace for other players who also wish to buy them. So if you have enough money, you can essentially corner the market and expand your real estate empire. Now, what I like about this game is even though it has an in-game cash shop, you don't really need to spend, as they will give you in-game coins just by clicking on briefcase on the road. It's an extremely straightforward game that you can play for 5 minutes a day if you want, or you can try to compete to be number 1 in your city and even in the country. Now, if you start today, you're going to receive an extra $1 million in-game cash with a special starter pack waiting for you. Head over to the link in the description and download the game today. And that is market share and profit margins. Because of TSMC's technological advantage and the demand for smaller chips grow exponentially every year, as you can see on the chart, in 2018, a 7 nanometer is 9% of TSMC's revenue, but it jumped to a 27% in just 1 year. This constant advantage allowed TSMC to capture most of its market share. And this actually creates a snowball effect from long ago. So first of all, let's take a look at their financial statements. In 2020, an unaudited statement shows that the income from operation is 19.25 billion USD, but take a look at its R&D write-off. It's 3.7 billion. So if we ignore R&D, look at how much margin they're making on these chips. But they can sell these chips at a huge margin because they are always the only people in the world that can currently produce the smallest chips available. So in the last point, I said that they have an advantage and they're the only ones that can produce a 5 nanometer chip. But this is actually true for almost every single iteration before the 5 nanometers. So if you trace back one step, the 7 nanometers up until right now, only TSMC, Samsung, and maybe Intel can do it. Even in last iteration, most people haven't even caught up to it. So now you can see how much ahead TSMC is when it comes to their own industry. So this actually creates a huge snowball effect that happened from long ago and TSMC can actually enjoy moving forward. In the beginning, due to better R&D, TSMC is ahead while everyone is still produce older and bigger chips. So this caused them to be able to sell it at a very high price. They can take the huge profit margin and invest even more into R&D for the next smaller version of chips. They rinse and repeat at every iteration. They're always ahead, so it's basically impossible to catch up to them as long as they keep up their R&D. As you can see, most people haven't even caught up to the 7 nanometers, and they're already announcing they're done with the 5 nanometer and they're moving on the 3 nanometer in the coming future. And on the other side, the clients aren't going to wait for the chip makers to catch up in speed. If they see one company able to do something that they thought it was impossible, for example, a 3 nanometer chip, well, they're going to start designing chips around this technology and pay TSMC to produce them. So before, people always say how Microsoft have cornered the market, they can sell the product at very high price and no one can ever compete with them. Well, I see the same story of TSMC, except I think they can do it even harder than what Microsoft did with the PC market. So those are all the strengths and points I think TSMC has to really dominate the market. But we also need to watch out for any weaknesses that they might have. Now, the first weakness is dependent on clients. So like I said before, not having your brand on the product is great. This is how you attract everyone to hire you to make chips for them. However, this causes you to rely on them. Now, I don't think there are competitors that can catch up very fast and replace you, but if there's economic slowdown in one area of the world, you might suddenly see a lot less demand from some companies, and that could hurt your revenue. Now, second weakness I see is the Moore's Law coming to an end. So Moore's Law is developed in 1965 by someone called Gordon Moore, and basically he's stating that because of technological demand and evolution, the number of transistors we can fit in a circuit will double every 2 years. Now, overall, Moore's Law have been accurate to predict the evolution of transistors. Many argue that eventually this law will come to an end. It cannot just keep evolving and packing more and more transistors in the same place. And likely it's not going to be a technological problem, but more as an economic issue. So for example, the fabs that make the most advanced chips are getting exponentially more expensive, rising at 13% a year. By 2022, it's going to cost $16 billion or more. So as costs keep going up, maybe we'll reach a point where it no longer makes economical sense to try to build them even smaller. However, as of this moment, TSMC have announced they're moving on to a 3 nanometer chip. So at least for them, we haven't reached that point yet. But many have been arguing that we will see that point sometime in the future. And if we do, then TSMC may have to make a technological leap to other versions of production method that is more cost efficient. Or if they don't, then maybe slowly other companies will be able to catch up and make the same thing as TSMC. So that is an unknown that we need to keep in mind. But so far from what I see, they're so far ahead technological wise and production method wise that it's going to take years for someone to really have a chance to catch up and compete with TSMC. So this is why the more I study about this company, the more confident I have in their ability to dominate extremely hard in the next decade or so. Now, like I said, this is just my personal opinion. I just want to walk you through my thought process. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Really want to hear your thoughts. And also, if you like these videos, I upload them every Tuesday, 8:30 EST. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to my channel. Click the bell button so you get all the notification in the future. Alright, this is Jacky Go. I hope you found this interesting. I'll see you next week. Bye!